إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولله الحمد. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليًّا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليًّا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل وحي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم اجعل قلبي بارا وعملي سارا وعيشي كارا ورزقي دارا وأولاد أبرارا، واجعلني عند قبر نبيك محمد مصطفى صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم مستقرا وقرارا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. هيا على الصلاة، هيا على الصلاة، هيا على الفلاح، هيا على الفلاح، هيا على خير العمل، هيا على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سبحان من لا يعتدي على أهل مملكتي، سبحان من لا يأخذ أهل الأرض بألوان العذاب، سبحان رؤوف الرحيم. اللهم اجعل في قلبي نورا وبصرا وفهما وعلما، إنك على كل شيء قدير. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بحول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لا إله إلا الله العظيم الحليم. لا إله إلا الله رب العرش الكريم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم إني أسألك موجبات رحمتك وعذاب مغفرتك والغنيمة من كل بر والسلامة من كل إثم. اللهم لا تدع لي ذنبا إلا غفرته ولا حما إلا فرجته ولا سقما إلا شفيته ولا عيبا إلا سترته ولا رزقا إلا بسطته ولا خوفا إلا آمنته ولا سوءا إلا صرفته ولا حاجة هي لك رضا ولي فيها صلاح إلا قضيتها يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين رب العالمين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. اللهم صل على محمد. هيا على الصلاة. هيا على الصلاة. هيا على الفلاح. هيا على الفلاح. هيا على خير العمل. هيا على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة. قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بحول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من نفس لا تشبع، ومن قلب لا يخشى، ومن علم لا ينفع، ومن صلاة لا ترفع، ومن دعاء لا يسمع. اللهم إني أسألك يسر بعد العسر، والفرج بعد الكرب، والرخاء بعد الشدة. اللهم ما بنا من نعمة فمنك، لا إله إلا أنت، أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا نبي الله، السلام عليك يا حبيب الله، السلام عليك يا مولاي يا أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا مولاي يا حسن والحسين سيد الشباب أهل الجنة، السلام عليك يا مولاي يا علي بن الحسين زين العابدين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا حجة القائم المهدي الإمام المنتظر صاحب الزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن، السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان، السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك وزحورك وجعلنا من أنصارك وشيعتك وزوارك ومحبيك. السلام عليكم يا شهداء كربلاء جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم. تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون. لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون. إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون. وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون. وسواء عليهم أنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون. إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم. إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين. واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم 2 فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون. قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون. قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين. قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم. قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون. وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون. وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون. أتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون. إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين. إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون. قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين. وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين. إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون. يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون. ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون. وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون. وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون. وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون. سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون. وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون. والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم. والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم. لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون. وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون. وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين. وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون. وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين. وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا ونطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيء ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اسلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لتمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره نكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون ولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين واضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم.
पर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलवात। अपने गम फातिमा अब किसको सुनाए बाबा, अपने गम फातिमा अब किसको सुनाए बाबा। दर्द जो बाद तेरे मैंने, दर्द जो बाद तेरे मैंने उठाए बाबा, उठाए बाबा। अपने गम फातिमा अब किसको सुनाए बाबा। आके ठहरे है मेरे दर पे न भेजा है सलाम। दिन के दोपहर दले अब तो उतर आई है शाम। मुझसे मिलने के लिए आज, मुझसे मिलने के लिए आज न आए बाबा, न आए बाबा। अपने गम फातिमा अब किसको सुनाए बाबा। तुझ पे मरने वो तेरे इश्क में जीने वाले, ऐसे बदले हैं तेरे बाद मदीने वाले। तेरे एहकाम भी हिज़ियान, तेरे एहकाम भी हिज़ियान बताए बाबा, बताए बाबा। अपने गम फातिमा अब किसको सुनाए बाबा। अब तो है दर से मुसलमान खफा रहते हैं। जाने किस सोच में गुम शहरे खुदा बैठे हैं। कब से आंगन में यूं ही सर को, कब से आंगन में यूं ही सर को झुकाए बाबा, झुकाए बाबा। अपने गम फातिमा किसको सुनाए बाबा। आज मस्जिद में अज़ान देने नहीं आए बिलाल। गम से बूज़र तो कहीं बैठे है अम्मार निदाल। आए के अब कहाँ जाए ज़माने के सताए बाबा, सताए बाबा। अपने गम फातिमा अब किसको सुनाए बाबा। अपने गम फातिमा अब किसको सुनाए बाबा। पर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु।
मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु।
रोज़े पे मुस्तफ़ा के उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के ज़ैनब नौशाद आई है। रोज़े पे मुस्तफ़ा के उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के ज़ैनब नौशाद आई है। नाना अजीब सानए हम पर गुज़र गए, रंजो अलम ने घेर लिया हम जिधर गए। नाना खुदा के घर में ना हमको अमा मिली, भाई ने शहर छोड़ के जंगल की राह ली। रोज़े पे मुस्तफ़ा के उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के ज़ैनब नौशाद आई है। नाना हमारे घर का सब असबाब लुट गया, नाना हमारे सर पे ना बाकी रही रिदा। नाना हजार तरह जफा की लाइनों ने, खैमों में हाय आग लगा दी लाइनों ने। रोज़े पे मुस्तफ़ा के उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के ज़ैनब नौशाद आई है। नाना शहीद हो गए भाई के जानसार, एक एक करके मर गए असहाब ज़ी वकार। नाना बला के बन में कयामत का रन पड़ा, भाई से भाई बाप से बेटा बिछड़ गया। रोज़े पे मुस्तफ़ा के उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के ज़ैनब नौशाद आई है। नाना ज़मीन कर्बो बला लाल हो गई, कासिम की लाश घोरों से पामाल हो गई। नाना कटा के शानों को अब्बास मर गए, गुर्बत में भाई जान को बेआस कर गए। रोज़े पे मुस्तफ़ा के उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के ज़ैनब नौशाद आई है। नाना असीर 12 थे और एक थी रसन, बांधे गए थे मिसल गुनाहगार खस्ततन। नाना हम अपने हाल पे रोते थे ज़ार ज़ार, नाना हमारे हाल पे हंसते थे बदशियार। रोज़े पे मुस्तफ़ा के उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के ज़ैनब नौशाद आई है। इतना में एक शामी ने नाना गज़ब किया, सैदानी को कनीज़ी में उसने तलब किया। होती थी लाख ज़िल्लत हम देखते रहे, हंस हंस के ताज़ियान सितम झेलते रहे। रोज़े पे मुस्तफ़ा के उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के बिना शादाई है। नाना तबाह हो के हम आए हैं शाम से, एक दाग नौ सकीना कलाए हैं शाम से। अब तक है नील रस्सी के शानों को देख लो, नाना हमारे तन पे निशानों को देख लो। रोज़े पे मुस्तफ़ा के उदासी सी छाई है, कुनबे को खो के ज़ैनब नौशाद आई है। ज़ैनब जो रो के करती थी कब्रे नबी पे बैन, थर्रा रहा था रोज़ाए सुल्तान माशरकैन। बस ख़त्म कर निसार ये गमनाक दास्तां, रोए है सलम में ज़मीं और आसमां। पर मोहम्मद वाल मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु।
Assalamu alaikum everyone. First of all, I'd like to offer you all and the Imam of our time condolences for the Shahadat of Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And Imam Ali Raza alayhi salam. I'm just here to make an announcement regarding a Quran competition that PACE is organizing. I'll just give Zain a moment to upload the poster on that. Yeah, so I think the poster, you won't be able to see the details, but I can give you a bit of summary. So the competition is going to be held in December. It's open for both male and female participants. So you all are welcome to join. There are 3 categories. The first one is open recitation. The second one is Quran memorization / hifz. And the third one is Quran tafsir / marifat. If you see, I don't know whether you can see the circle on the left, this competition is open to all UK Jamaats. So we want to encourage healthy competition and also uplift the skills of our youth and kids. We had sent this message previously on the MKSI Leicester WhatsApp group. There are a few changes compared to the message that was sent. We had received feedback that in the adults category for hifz, there were too many surahs. There were 5 surahs previously. So we have reduced it down to 2 now. The other changes, we have extended the deadline from 6th of October to 15th of October. And the third change is the email address at the bottom. We'll be sending this again via the MKSI WhatsApp group for the benefit of everyone. We may also consider an under 5 category just for Leicester, but that depends on the interest. So in gents, please let me know if you're interested, not just for under 5, but even for the other categories. If you have any question, then please let me know. And in the ladies, you can contact Sister Batul Salman and Sister Tyra Haji. This is the end of the announcement. Zain, could you please put today's sponsors on the screen? Please, can you all recite a Fatiha? I would now like to invite Sheikh Anwar Jaffer to deliver today's lecture with 3 loud salawat, please.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد صل على محمد. والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله ببركة الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومنهم الذين يؤذون النبي ويقولون هو أذن قل أذن خير لكم آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Respected elders, scholars, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. When we speak about the Holy Prophet of Islam, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, despite his intellectual capacity, considering that he was a very intelligent person, and the fact that he had answers to all of the questions that people used to ask him, the Quran highlights more about his social interactions and how his akhlaq was with the people around him. And there's a reason why the Quran highlights this specifically. Because the Quran explains that the Holy Prophet is uswatun hasana, that he's considered to be a role model. So for you and I living in 2022, when we turn to the Quran and when we refer back to the character and the identity of the Holy Prophet of Islam, there are many things that we can extract from his life that we can apply within our own lives as well. From an intellectual perspective, it's hard to understand the knowledge of the Holy Prophet. But when we approach his social interactions and how he used to deal with his friends and neighbors and families and even his enemies, we can of course take those lessons and integrate them within our lives. Now this particular ayah of the Holy Quran is very, very interesting. وَمِنْهُمُ الَّذِينَ يُؤْذُونَ النَّبِيَّ وَيَقُولُونَ هُوَ أُذْنٌ. That there were those from the society that he was engaged with, they used to insult the Holy Prophet of Islam and they used to call him an udhun. Udhun in Arabic is an ear. The sense that they used to say that the Prophet listens to everyone. People would randomly, they would come to the Holy Prophet of Islam, they would sit with him, they would talk. And sometimes we need that in our lives, don't we? We have certain distresses that we go through, adversities we go through, we have problems at work, we have problems at home, we have problems everywhere. But there is this one person we know in the community who is willing to sit down and willing to listen to us. Some people even pay, for example, counselors to listen to our problems and try and find solutions to our problems. So these individuals, the hypocrites, they used to use this term udhnun in reference to the Holy Prophet and use it as a derogatory term. That the people would come, they would listen to him, and the Prophet would listen to them attentively. The people would come, they would talk to him, and the Prophet would listen to them attentively, discerningly. He would just listen. Allama Tabatabai, when he came to the tafsir of this particular verse, he said there are two reasons why he was called an udhn. The first reason was because he would hear that which is good. So he would listen attentively to that which is good, and then later he would come and he would give what he was told or what he heard to the people, meaning that whenever revelation would come towards him, he would listen attentively and then he would pass on the message to the people. He said the second meaning is this meaning that we spoke of, that many people would come towards him, they would sit down, they would talk, and the Prophet would just listen. He says that according to his conclusion, he says the second one is a better interpretation, because through it he was able to mold the character and the identity of the people. He was able to nurture them, and he was able to develop a strong social relationship with them by listening to them. It's fundamental. Sometimes the idea of just simply listening, even though it's such a simple concept, it's very hard to integrate within our lives. If someone was to talk to you and someone was to say something to you, it's very hard for us to just be quiet and listen. At times we feel necessary to give our own opinions as well. And when we do so, we break that whole social interaction altogether. We make it worse. Here the Quran is highlighting that the Prophet had this wonderful skill where he would just listen to the people. The people would have different ideas, the people would have different approaches, different philosophies, different cultural backgrounds. They would come, they would listen, they would talk to the Prophet, and the Prophet would just listen. It doesn't mean that the Prophet would take on board everything that they said. No, the Prophet would listen and he would give them the time to talk to him. Now it's wonderful that this particular ayah of the Holy Quran, what it does is it highlights the leadership skills of the Holy Prophet of Islam. And it's not just in reservations to leaders, but it can apply to every single one of us. The Quran highlights that as a leader, here the Prophet being a political leader of Medina, when people, or when he gives opportunity to the people to come and talk to him, indirectly he's telling to the people, or he's telling the people that, look, your time is worth, or your presence is worth something to me. Your presence is worth something to me. Your time is something valuable to me, and my time is valuable to you as well. That if you want to come and see me or meet me, then feel free to do so. By developing such a relationship, the Holy Prophet of Islam was able again to nurture and attract the hearts of the people. From this perspective, we realize that the Prophet was not just considered to be an intelligent person, but emotionally he was considered to be an intelligent person. And this opens up a whole new discussion with regards to what exactly emotional intelligence is. You see, many of us are not aware of this idea or this concept. It's relatively new, considering that it was something that was brought up and exploded and expanded in the 1990s. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of it. But when you reflect back to the life of the Holy Prophet and how the Quran speaks about the Holy Prophet and his akhlaq, we can most definitely conclude to the fact and say that the Prophet was most definitely considered to be an emotionally intelligent person. Now this particular definition, you won't find it within our sources. When you refer to the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt or even the Quran, you wouldn't have this idea of emotional intelligence being found anywhere. But the idea behind this is that if a person was to develop akhlaq as it is taught by the Quran as well as the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt, it is assumed that a person who has akhlaq is emotionally intelligent. So although the term is not used, the concept is very much alive. So when you look at the character of the Holy Prophet of Islam, we can most definitely conclude to say that he was emotionally intelligent. Now in the 1990s, a man by the name of Daniel Goleman, he introduced a whole research based on what emotional intelligence is. And some of his conclusions were absolutely remarkable. He came forward and he said that there's a difference between emotional intelligence, EQ, and IQ. He said that for many centuries, people believed that having a high IQ meant that the person would go on and become very successful in life. So all of the leaders and CEOs that we come across in our lives, those that we know of, we automatically assume that they were very clever when they were in school. They have a very high IQ level, and so on and so forth. So a person who has a high IQ, by necessity, would go on to be very successful individuals in the world. Now Goldman in his research concluded, he said that that's not necessarily the case. As in today, as fathers, many of us are fathers, we make sure that our children go to the best school so that they get the best grades. Not only that, they have to go through certain clubs, they have to go through certain tuition classes to make sure that they get the best grades. Then they go on to the best of universities, because that implies that later on they will be successful. Goldman's conclusion was different. He said high IQ does not necessarily mean that the person will be successful later on in life. What is more important than IQ is the fact that the person has EQ, emotional intelligence. And he says 80% of a person's EQ level contributes to his level of success, whereas 20% of his IQ contributes to his success. So heavier weight is given to emotional intelligence rather than IQ, the intellectual capacity of the human being. In fact, further studies showed, and this is something quite remarkable as well, they said that a person who is intelligent, a person who has high levels of IQ and who is highly intelligent, they lack social skills, especially when dealing with the people around them. In fact, at times they can be very stubborn, at times they lack empathy, they don't know how people are feeling or what people are going through in their lives. To them, they have a particular objective and they want those objectives to be met. Even if it puts all of the people around them through hell, those objectives have to be met. So they realize that people who have a higher IQ lack social skills. And the opposite was true as well. They said that people who are less intelligent, it was very easy for them to grasp new ideas, to grasp new skills, especially on a social level. So people who are relatively unintelligent, it was easier for them to learn new skills, to unlearn things that they knew already and to learn new skills. Whereas a person who was highly intelligent, it was hard for them to unlearn new things, unlearn the things that they knew, and for them to learn new things on a social level, on a social arena. Now when you come back to the Holy Prophet of Islam, there's an ayah in the Holy Quran that speaks about this, and it's quite wonderful that Allah highlights this for us. He says, لو كنت فظا غليظ القلب لانفضوا من حولك. Ya Rasulullah, if you were hard-hearted with the people around you, then naturally the people would walk away from you, they would have abandoned you long ago. Now here the Holy Prophet's character is being identified through his akhlaq, not through his intellectual level. If you are hard-hearted, the people would have abandoned you and they would have abandoned your message. It was through the akhlaq of the Holy Prophet that he was able to grab the hearts of the people. It was the basis, it was the pivot to his whole revolution. It wasn't his intellectual capacity. Don't think that the Prophet used to go around and shove knowledge down people's throat and then convince them that Tawheed was the right path. The Prophet, through his akhlaq, through his kindness, his compassion, he was able to nurture the people and bring them towards the path of Tawheed. The verse carries on, وَعْفُ عَنْهُمْ. Forgive the people. The people, they make many mistakes in their lives. Some will betray you. Some will lose their trust in you. Some, for example, they will do certain things that is not done in the right way, and they will continue to make these mistakes. Wa'afu anhum. Overlook their mistakes. Understand that they are deficient. Wastaghfir lahum. And seek istighfar for them. The verse doesn't say waghfir lahum and forgive them. The verse says seek forgiveness for them. There's a vast difference between the two. And then he says, and then Allah says, وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. Make them engaged. Speak to them. Ask for their advice. You see, the Prophet here wasn't commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to go and listen to them and to take on their advice. Allah just said, speak to them. Listen to what they have to say. أُذْنٌ خَيْرٍ لَكُمْ. Being an ear is good for you. Listen to what they have to say. Maybe some of them will have certain ideas which are rubbish. Some of them will have ideas which are good. You don't necessarily need to take on board all of their advices. Just listen to what they have to say. وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. And consult them in your affairs. Now, hand to heart, does the Prophet need the consultation of the people around him? No. مَا يَنْتَقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. Every decision that the Holy Prophet makes is connected with wahi. It's connected with the alim al-malakut. But Allah is telling the Prophet, listen, as a leader, you need to speak to the people and listen to what they have to say. Make them part and parcel of that process. Again, from a leadership capacity, the Quran is highlighting that a leader must most definitely possess some of these characteristics. Now, of course, it's not just restricted to leaders, but it can apply to each and every single one of us in our lives. Whether you're a leader of a company, whether you're a leader of an organization, whether you're a leader of, for example, a community, or even in your own homes. Many of us are Rabbul Bayt, aren't we? We are the leaders within our own household. These are essential skills, fundamental, rudimentary skills that we should develop within our lives. Speak to the people around us. Listen to their advice. You're not obligated to listen and to take on what they say, but just listen to what they have to say. Look at the example of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam. Nabi Ibrahim, he is shown in a dream that he has to slaughter his son. He has to slaughter his son. He approaches Nabi Ismail. He says, Inni ara fil manam adbahuk. He says, I have seen in my dream that I am to slaughter you. Mada tara. He says, my son, what do you think of this? What's your opinion about this? Does Nabi Ibrahim need to consult his son about the commandment that Allah has given him in his dream? No. It's the idea that when you open up to someone, when you speak to them, you take on their advice, you just listen to them, it builds a social relationship. It builds a strong social relationship between the parties involved. The Holy Prophet of Islam, he was commanded by Allah to consult with the people. Make them part and parcel of the process. Do not appear as if you're a dictator. It's not the idea that the people would come forward and say, Ya Rasulullah, you know, if we sat with you and we told you our ideas, we know that you get your ideas from Allah. There's no need for us to sit down and talk to you. That's not the idea that's being spoken of here. The idea is that the Prophet is telling the people that, look, your time is valuable to me and my time is valuable to you as well. That your presence is valuable to me and I care for it. Sit down and talk. Through that, a leader tells his community that they are worth something, that they are meaningful to him in his life. Now, when the Holy Prophet of Islam migrates to the city of Medina, you find that naturally, what he does is he establishes a political system. And he's able to do that simply based on his akhlaq and how he deals with the people around him. Now, going back to the whole discussions of emotional intelligence, the definition of emotional intelligence is when the aql has a presence amidst all of the emotions that we go through. So as a human being, we go through anger, we have feelings of, for example, grief and sorrow and sadness and jubilation and joy, lust, and all of these are different emotions that we go through. But in the midst of all of these emotions, the aql stands upright. The intellectual power of the human being. And the aql has a control over all of these different emotions. And this idea can be traced back all the way to the Greeks. Now, the ancient Greek philosophers spoke about the whole role of emotions and feelings. And they said that emotions and feelings, amongst them were Plato and Aristotle, they said that feelings and emotions have such a profound effect within our lives that it can warp reality for us. It can skew reality for us. It can change our sensory perceptions. Now think about that. That's quite powerful for them to say that, despite the fact that they lived thousands of years before us. When you're angry towards someone, and this is an example, when you're angry towards someone, and you have this level of aggression in your heart towards them, whatever they say will anger you. Even if they praise you, it will anger you. True or no? Because the emotion of anger is so strong that even if this person was to say something good about you, you're not willing to accept it. And the opposite holds true as well. In the world of social media, we go through a whole process of finding role models and loving people simply based on the amount of followers that they have on Instagram, for example. That love that is associated to a person. If you excessively love someone, even if that person was to humiliate you and insult you, you would love them for it. It's a sad reality that we're living in. But this is what emotions does. Emotions skew reality for us. So the Greek philosophers, they came and they said that a person needs to have a strong power or control over their emotions using their aql. You need to be able to control and tame your emotions. The whole purpose of emotional intelligence, the whole science of this is so that a person can empathize, so a person can develop empathy in his life. empathy towards the people that you interact with on a daily basis. That you feel what the person is feeling when you interact with them, and they feel what you feel when they interact with you. The whole conclusion of emotional intelligence is that you empathize, and you're willing to empathize in your social interactions with the people around you. There's a very interesting humanist psychologist by the name of Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers came forward and he said in one of his works, he says that for a person to enhance his social interactions with the people around him, there are two things he needs. There are two things he needs to do. Number one, he needs to have unconditional positive regard. That you constantly see people in a positive way. Islam has already talked about this in the Holy Quran. Husn al-dhan. Why do we always constantly talk about husn al-dhan? Husn al-dhan, what is it? Is when you're constantly thinking positive about people. You have to come up with 70 excuses before you can even rebuke or reprimand someone. Always find excuses for people. Always see them in a positive way, unconditionally. And then secondly, he comes forward and he says, empathy. You need to have both of these things within your character as a part of your identity for you to be a successful human being in your social interactions. Now there's a third verse in the Holy Quran when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the Holy Prophet of Islam. He says, لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ حَرِيصٌ عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا عَنِتُّمْ. Indeed, a prophet has been sent from amongst you. He's not a stranger to you. He is part of your own community. He knows your culture. He knows how you think. He knows your behavior. He knows what values you hold dear to your heart. He is from amongst you. Azizun alayhi ma anittum. And he cares for all of the distresses that you go through in your life. Between brackets, the Prophet had this ability to empathize. He knows how you go through. He knows he cares for all of the different distresses that you go through in your life. And he cares for you. Harisun alaykum bil mu'minin. And he is anxious that you are successful in your life. That you turn to Allah, you build a relationship with Allah. Whenever you make mistakes, you seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's anxious that you are successful both in dunya as well as in the hereafter. You see, when the Holy Prophet moved to the city of Medina, he developed a political structure. And by doing so, he established many different laws. And many of these laws were absolutely unknown to the people of the time. Because the culture that they had embedded themselves within, they knew nothing except what their forefathers had taught them. So one of the rights that he established were the rights of women. That women are not considered to be objects that you just go and bury simply because later on you will consider them to be a burden on you. Women were given rights. And we've all heard about the traditions of how he used to treat his daughter Az-Zahra alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Muhammad. That whenever she would walk into the room, he would stand. You see, the fact that the people saw him standing for his own daughter, this was so unknown to them. It was so ajib, it was so strange to them. They used to ask questions, why on earth is this person standing up for a woman? Let alone the Prophet of Allah for his daughter. The Prophet was sending a message that there are certain rights that women have, that there are certain rights that females have within the community, within society. And of course, it was emphasizing the position of Fatima az-Zahra alayhi salam. So he would stand whenever she would walk into the room. He would kiss her hand. He would let her sit where he sat. So from one perspective, he began to introduce the rights of women. The second, he began to introduce the rights of the people. Even the rights of the minorities that were living within the city of Medina. They say that one day, as he was walking, there was a mayyit on the floor. There was a corpse, a body. And it belonged to one of the minorities. So the Prophet, when he saw this, now of course, remember, you're now living in the time of Jahiliyyah. It's very common for you to walk down the street and see a dead body. This is how the people of Jahiliyyah used to live. He sees a dead body, a corpse in the road. He begins to deliver a sermon publicly and he reprimands those who are responsible for this, that they will see the fires of hell, that they will be punished within the fires of hell. He delivers a lengthy sermon where he begins to defend the rights of the minority. Again, this was unknown to the people of the time. The Prophet, even when it came to the minorities, those who had not accepted Islam, he used to empathize with them. He used to he used to link up with them. He used to touch with them on an emotional level. And they were all affected by him in one point or another. You see, what's beautiful when you speak about emotional intelligence, not of the Holy Prophet of Islam, but you can apply this in the lives of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. We have voluminous works. We have voluminous works today that speak about the history of the Imams. So many stories we've heard of for the past decades. All of those who sit on this member, we collect and recollect the stories of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. This is all from the historical sources that we have. Despite the traditions that we have, there is not one tradition that a person comes forward and he says that I interacted with one of the 12 Imams and I was unhappy at the end of the interaction, that I was upset at them or I was angry at them. Not one narration explains to us that the people had a negative interaction with the Imam and they were then therefore dissuaded to enter the religion of Islam. But we have so many different narrations on the other hand, where people, even the enemies, would come and interact with the Imams and they would somehow be attracted to the message of the Imam alayhi salam. So the Holy Prophet was very much preserving and supporting the roles of the minorities and of course looking after their rights as well. They say that after the Battle of Khaybar, and the Battle of Khaybar was considered to be a very significant battle. It changed the whole dynamics on a political level of the Muslims at the time. When they were victorious against the Jews of Khaybar, they say the women were taken as captives. There were two women in specific. Bilal had the responsibility to bring these two women to the Holy Prophet. And so what happened was Bilal, for one reason or another, he took these two women and he took them through the battlefield. Now these two women, as they were walking in the battlefield, they saw the tribesmen, they saw some of their family members, the cousins, uncles, whatever it may be. They saw their own brothers dead and they began to cry. They began to lament. They were brought to the Holy Prophet of Islam. The Prophet asks them, why is it that you cry? He says, because we passed the battlefield, we saw our dead tribesmen. The Prophet turns to Bilal, and we know how much the Prophet loved Bilal. And despite that love he had for Bilal, he reprimands him, he rebukes him. Bilal, do you not have any rahmah in your heart? He says, I know coming through the battlefield was a shortcut for you, but you could have taken the longer way round. What makes you think that it's perfectly fine to drag the women through the battlefield and let them witness their own tribesmen dead in the battlefield? So the Prophet really touched out. He really cared for his enemies even. You see, there's a reason why the people were so attracted to the message of the Holy Prophet. It was because he was able to empathize. He was able to link out and touch them on a heart-to-heart level. They say there was a beggar who entered the masjid one day. And he openly announced to the people, he said, Ya Rasulullah, I'm in need of help, financial help. So the Holy Prophet gives him some money, and then he says to him, are you satisfied? The man says, no, I'm not satisfied. Prophet gives him more money. He says, are you satisfied now? He says, no, I'm not satisfied. Now the companions, remember, trigger fingers. They had their hands on their swords. They were like, listen, we're ready to beat him. We're ready to even take him out and show him a lesson. The Prophet tells them, calm down, sit, relax. You see, the Prophet knew exactly how the people's behavior was, and he knew how to change them. He tells the person to go home. He tells his companions to calm down. In the dark hours of the night, the Prophet goes to this person's home. He sits down, he has a conversation with the person. And the person tells the Prophet, he says, look, I didn't have the intention to insult you or even humiliate you in front of your companions. But it came across that way. And the Prophet says, yeah, it came across that way, that you insulted me. And now because of that interaction, My companions belittle you, and my companions see you of a low level. The Prophet gave him and gave him and gave him and then said to him, are you now satisfied? And the man said, I'm satisfied now. He said, do me a favor, tomorrow morning, come back to Masjid al-Nabi. Do what you did today. Come back to Masjid al-Nabi and just speak to me in a way where you show my companions that you're satisfied. It's not for me, it's for you. Because in their eyes, you have lost all credibility. But if you were to do this, then at least you would be able to maintain some of that credibility that you have. You may be able to raise that credibility that you have in their eyes. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So the Prophet was very much able to empathize with the people. He was able to touch the people through the values of empathy. Now you see, empathy in itself is a very difficult position to reach. It's very difficult for me to empathize what you're going through in your life. And likewise for you to empathize with what I'm going through in my life. Empathy is not normal. We have to go out of our way to actually empathize with the people that we're dealing with. You know, some of us will look at the dictionary terminology of empathy to be able to understand and see how others feel and say, well, I empathize, I'm an empathetic person, where it's actually quite difficult. It's not that easy. When you look at our social interactions with one another, and some of the arguments have been preserved or presented to show this. When you look at how you and I socially interact with one another, the reason why we communicate with one another, this is a large community. It's impossible for each and every single person to have a good relationship with everyone. But when we do interact with one another, it's because we want something from each other, isn't it? I'll contact you one day and I'll say, look, I need something done, can you do it for me? The reason why I contact you many a times is because I need something from you or you need something from me. In the corporate world, what happens? When you have work with someone, you call them up, you make sure that there is at least 5, 10, 15 minutes of a bit of a chit chat. You know, you talk about the weekend, you talk about the football match, you talk about this, you talk about that. And then once you've actually gone into the discussion, then you start to introduce what you really want from them or what they want from you. That's how it works. We engage in that little chit chat because we don't want the person to feel as if that the only reason why I've contacted them is because I want something from them. So there's that leeway for a small chit chat. Even the ulama speak of this. They say that we interact with one another, and what happens is that we treat one another as objects rather than as human beings. We see one another as a necessary function, and we forget that we're all human beings, or the person that I'm dealing with is a human being. See, again, it's difficult to empathize. It's difficult to develop empathy. Let me give you another example. As a community, you'll realize that within this community, as well as all the other communities, there are certain bubbles. We all belong to a certain bubble. The moment a person enters a bubble, the friends that he has around him, there is that positive energy. There's always that one thing that you have common amongst the people in that bubble. So you all get along. There's that positive vibe, there's that positive energy within the bubble. Subconsciously, what you've done is you've now created a negative response to anyone outside of this bubble. So anyone who does not belong to this bubble, you may approach or you may interact with them on an aggressive level. Now, it doesn't mean that you verbally abuse them or even physically abuse them. This is what is known as microaggression. You may speak to them differently. And this happens on a subconscious level. It's all automatic without you even understanding or even realizing this. If someone from outside of the bubble was to speak to you, you speak to them differently the way you speak to the people within that bubble. So you have this whole discussion of microaggression. You treat people differently, especially those people who are not from that specific group that you belong to. Now the beauty of this entire discussion is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us in a way that naturally we can communicate with the people and we can enhance our levels of empathy towards the people. And neuroscience or advanced neuroscience has actually come to this understanding. And they say that as social beings, when we interact with one another, what we do on a subconscious level is try to mirror the emotions of the person we're talking to. So if you're, for example, happy, it makes me happy. This is what is known as mirror neurons, that I connect with you by replicating your emotions. When someone smiles, what do? We smile back, don't we? We don't think about smiling back. It happens. It happens automatically. This is because the mirror neurons are active now. We try and replicate the behavior and the emotions of the people around us. When someone is sad, when someone is in pain, we sympathize with them. We feel a bit of that pain. In a funeral, for example, we don't come in wearing bright clothes or start cracking jokes. When we speak to the people who have lost a personality in their family, we approach them with a bit of sense. We approach them with a bit of grief, with a bit of pain as well, because we're trying to replicate the same emotions and the same behavior. It's how Allah has created us, that we develop and we strengthen our ties with one another by feeling what the other person feels. During the days of Azar, for example, we all come wearing black. We sit down, we cry, we shed tears. Naturally, this creates an environment of gham, and we all share that. It's something that is common within us, and it enhances our gham for the masa'ib of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. In history, when Zainab alayhi salam went back towards Kufa with the other ladies and with the Imam alayhi salam, she delivers a sermon, a very, very powerful sermon. She reprimands and she rebukes the people of Kufa. وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّتِي نَقَضَتْ غَزْلَهَا مِنْ بَعْدِ قُوَّةٍ أَنْكَاثًا. Very profound verse that she introduces, and she carries on and she rebukes them and reprimands them. Towards the end of the sermon, what happens? The people are crying, the people are weeping, the people are lamenting. These are the same people who just in a number of days before betrayed the Imam alayhi salam are now crying and weeping because they saw her grief. Her grief touched them, and now they were all in the state of sorrow and sadness. In fact, it was so powerful that even later on they stood against the Bani Umayyah. The Tabi'in and the movement of the Tabi'in was because of the guilty conscience that was established by the ladies of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So very quickly, how do I develop emotional intelligence within my life? The Holy Prophet of Islam was able to revolutionize the whole of the Arabian Peninsula through his akhlaq. How can I try and develop some of that akhlaq within my life? Emotional intelligence has 5 steps to it. These are very simple. With practice, it can become part and parcel of our own nature. Number one, know your emotions. When you're speaking to someone will say something that triggers anger within you. You're reflective, introspection. You understand that something has been triggered within you, you are now angry. Number 2, manage your emotions. You control that anger. You do not let it overpower you. Number 3, you delay gratification. You convince yourself that if I was to speak out in anger, this would make me happy. You delay that gratification. You stop yourself from behaving the way you want to behave according to your emotions. You let your aql decide. Number 4, you observe the emotions of the person you're speaking to. If he's angry, you do not want to fuel that anger further. You stop the conversation where it is, or you start saying things to cut the conversation short. Number 5, you manage that relationship. If it's bad, you do not allow it to become worse, and so on and so forth. These are the 5 processes of emotional intelligence. And you realize the Prophet was so much aware of these 5 processes that again, and I emphasize this, he was able to nurture the hearts of the people around him. Abdurrahman ibn Auf is a famous example. Abdurrahman ibn Auf, by the way, one of the earliest companions of the Holy Prophet of Islam. engaged in many of the battles alongside the Prophet. According to some sources, he was the one who went to Abyssinia during the Hijrah, when the Prophet was in Mecca. Abdurrahman ibn Auf was very close to the Holy Prophet of Islam. They say that when the Holy Prophet lost his son, Qasim, according to some narrations, Ibrahim, he lost his son, an infant child. The Prophet wasn't home. The Prophet hears the news, he quickly rushes back home. Then he takes his son. It's a very emotional period for the Holy Prophet. He kisses his son, embraces his son. He's in this state of visible grief. Abdurrahman ibn Auf comes to him and he says, Ya Rasulullah, why do you cry? And so what kind of a silly question is that, saying to a person who has just lost his son? He says, why do you cry? Are you displeased with what Allah has chosen for you? As in, Allah through His wisdom and knowledge has chosen that your son is to die now. And there's khair in everything. So why do you shed tears? You should be, at least you shouldn't be showing grief. As in, if you and I were in that position, how would we react? Guaranteed we would never speak to that person ever again. For him to say, Ya Rasulullah, why do you cry when he has just lost his son? The Prophet responds, he says, the heart grieves, the soul grieves, but the tongue will never say anything that goes against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Such a simple statement. That's an emotionally intelligent statement to make. Abdurrahman ibn Auf, despite being so close to the Holy Prophet and being an ally of the Holy Prophet from the very beginning, he was there in Saqifa, by the way. And he was part of the 6-man shura at the time of Uthman ibn Affan, after the death of Umar ibn al-Khattab. Even with such individuals, the Prophet was able to nurture them as much as he could in that 23-year period. For 23 years, all the Prophet did was give back to the community, show them kindness, show them love. But then, just as when the Prophet left this world, there was a revolution that took place within days. The Prophet, before leaving this world, left behind 2 commandments. 2 commandments for the people. The first, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا. There is no remuneration that I need from you from everything that I have done. إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَةِ. Except that the love that you have for my family. Love them. Number 2, the kitab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the itrah of the Holy Prophet of Islam. These were the 2 commandments that he left for the people. But then literally within a matter of days after his demise, after his shahada, you realize that everything was upheaved. Everything turned 180 degrees. Just like the people of Nabi Musa alayhi salam. Nabi Musa disappears for 40 days. Everything that they saw, the 9 great miracles they saw from the hand of Nabi Musa, they went back to worshipping idols. Just because Nabi Musa was away for 40 days. And the exact same thing happened after the demise of the Holy Prophet of Islam. When you look at Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, when he went towards Sham, or when he was taken towards Sham, as he enters the city of Sham, an old man came towards him. And he says to him, Yabna Rasulullah, he says, I pray and I thank Allah that He has destroyed you and your family. That Allah has taken all your authority away from you. And He has given Yazid the power to overwhelm you. One abuse after another. One abuse after another. How does Imam Sajjad alayhi salam respond? He says to him, oh man, have you not read the Holy Quran? He says, I read the Holy Quran. He says, have you not come across this verse? Inni as'alu, la as'alukum alayhi ajra illa al-mawaddata fil qurba. He says, of course I've read this verse. He says, we are the close relatives of the Holy Prophet of Islam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded that you love us. Have you not read the ayah? إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهَبَ عَنْكُمْ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. He says, yes, I have. He says, Allah has given us that fadila, that He has purified our lineage with a thorough purification. The man, when he hears the words of the Imam alayhi salam, he turns to Allah. He says, Ya Allah, I beg for forgiveness. For everything that I've done, I beg for forgiveness. He turns to the Imam, he says, Yabna Rasulullah, is there forgiveness for me? And the Imam says, you're forgiven, don't worry. Another man came towards Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. He says, Yabna Rasulullah, when I saw your father's head, I was pelting it with stones. And then I heard what you said, forgive me for what I've done. And the Imam says, you're forgiven. This is emotional intelligence. That you're able to control your emotions even in the worst of scenarios, and you're able to captivate the heart of the individual by shifting everything around at them. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi is in his final moments. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The Holy Prophet is in his final moments, in his deathbed. He turns to his companions and he says to them, Udu'u li habibi. He says, call on to me, bring my friend, my brother. Udu'u li habibi, bring my brother to me. One companion after another went towards Rasulullah. But then the Holy Prophet would constantly keep telling them, Udu'u li habibi, bring my brother to me. They came towards the Holy Lady Fatima az-Zahra alayhi salam. They said to her, Ya Fatima, where is Ali alayhi salam? Rasulullah wants to see Ali, where is he? Bring him for us. They say that when Ali alayhi salam enters the room alongside his wife az-Zahra al-Batul, they approach Rasulullah. The Holy Prophet turns to Fatima. She says, Ya Fatima, faman aadaki faqad aadani. He says, Ya Fatima, the one who hurts you, for indeed has hurt me. Ya Fatima, faman dhalamaki faqad dhalamani. The one who oppresses you, Ya Fatima, has oppressed me. Ya Fatima, know that I will complain to Allah to those who have oppressed you or those who will oppress you. Ya Fatima, it's as if I can see that day very soon when they come towards your house. But Ya Fatima, glad tidings for you that you will join me very soon. This puts a smile in the face of Fatima. They say that when Ali and Fatima alayhim as-salam entered the room, Al-Hasan wal-Husayn, they came as well with them. فجاء الحسن والحسين عليهم السلام يسيحان ويبكيان حتى وقع على رسول الله. They came weeping and lamenting towards the Holy Prophet. They came weeping and lamenting towards Rasulullah, and they fell on the chest of Rasulullah. Amir al-Mu'mineen tries to pull them away, for it may be heavy on the Holy Prophet. But Rasulullah stops Amir al-Mu'mineen. He says, Ya Ali, these are my final moments. Ya Ali, let them smell me and let me smell them one last time. They say the Prophet is weeping. The Ahl al-Kisa, all of them are weeping. We say, Ya Rasulullah, the princes of Jannah were on your chest, but who was on the chest of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam? When he pulled the beard of Abu Abdullah, when he exposed the neck of Abu Abdullah, when he struck Abu Abdullah 12 times from the back of his neck, then they say that there was a knock on the door. They came towards the door and they said, Oh man, leave us, this is a hard time for us. Rasulullah said, no, invite him, let him come in. It was the angel of death, Malik al-Maut, had entered the house. An angel had to seek permission to enter the house of Fatima. But what of those men who came towards the house of Fatima? إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون
हाय रसूले खुदा शाफी रोज़े जज़ा कहती है फातिमा बाबा रसूले खुदा हो रहे है सब मलूल अहले वतन या रसूल रोते है शेरे खुदा आह रसूले खुदा करती है ज़हरा बुका रो न क्यों करबला हो गए मुझसे जुदा हाय रसूले खुदा रोते हसनैन आज ख्वाते पछारे है आज वीरा मदीना हुआ बाबा रसूले खुदा शाहे खुरासान का आता जनाजा है ये पीतो सर ले अज़ा आता जनाजा है ये फातिमा के घर से ये निकला ये ताबूत है रो ले अज़ा आता जनाज़ा है ये शहरे खुरासान में मारे गए शाहिदी वीरा बंदी मदीना हुआ आता जनाज़ा है ये मामून मलून ने ज़हरा दिया शाह को रोते हैं आज मुस्तफ़ा आता जनाज़ा है ये या हुसैन
या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन मज़लूम बेवतन ये मेरा मौला रज़ा है मज़लूम बेवतन ये मेरा मौला रज़ा है मजलूम बेवतन ये मेरा मौला रिदा है, मजलूम बेवतन ये मेरा है, मजलूम बेवतन ये मेरा सब मिल क्या है, मजलूम बेवतन ये मेरा मौला है, जिसको जहर लोगों मुसलमान ने दिया है, मजलूम मौला रिज़ा है, मजलूम बेवतन ये मेरा सब आंखें करो बंद दुहाए है दुहाई, एक बीबी आज़ादारो यहाँ रोने को आई, लिपटी है जनाजे से नहीं सर पे रिदा है, मजलूम रिज़ा है, मजलूम बेवतन ये मेरा आएगा जनाजे पे नबी शाहे उमम भी, कुलसूम और रुक़ैया बीग़े मासूमाए कुंभी, वो बीबी है करबल में जली जिसकी अबा है, मजलूम रिज़ा है, मजलूम बेवतन ये यूं लूटा मुसलमानों ने ज़हरा के चमन को, है जहर दिया जैसे मेरे मौला गसन को, दोहराई गई हाय वहीं इस पे जफा है, मजलूम रिज़ा है, मजलूम बेवतन ये मेरा मासूमाए कुम देती रो रो के दुआई, ऐ काश मिला दे कोई मुझसे मेरा भाई, सुगरा की तरह हाय बहन जिससे जुदा है, मजलूम रिज़ा है, मजलूम मामूने अब्बासी की इनायत है ये लोगो, है आले पैगंबर से अदावत है ये लोगो, सैयदों से जरा देखो ये उम्मत की वफा है, मजलूम मौला रिज़ा है, मजलूम बेवतन ये मेरा कुर्बान मेरे मौला पे हो जान हमारी, मकरूज मेरे मौला की ये दुनिया है सारी, ये मर्तबा हो के भी गरीबुल गुरबा है, मजलूम मौला रिज़ा है, मजलूम है, रोते गए फरिश्ते भी ज़मीं और ज़मा भी, है लौह कलम अर्शे बरी कौनो मका भी, खैरुन्निसा के लाल के मातम की सदा है, मजलूम मौला रिज़ा ये मज़लूम बेवतन ये मेरा है रिज़ा मौला है रिज़ा मौला है रिज़ा मौला है रिज़ा मौला या हुसैन आंसू ज़हरा की यतीमी पे बहाओ लोगों आंसू ज़हरा की यतीमी पे बहाओ लोगों आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठाओ लोगों है रसूल अल्लाह है रसूल अल्लाह जिस अकीदत से बपा करते हो मिलाद नबी जिस अकीदत से बपा करते हो मिलाद नबी फर्श गम ऐसे मोहम्मद का फर्श गम ऐसे मोहम्मद का बिछाओ लोगों आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठाओ लोगों आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठाओ लोगों आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का ये सफ़े गम है मोहम्मद की यहाँ फ़र्क नहीं ये सफ़े गम है मोहम्मद की यहाँ फ़र्क नहीं हाँ इसी सफ़ में ज़माने को हाँ इसी सफ़ में ज़माने को बुलाओ लोगों आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठाओ लोगों आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठा घर में है फातिमा ज़हरा के अंधेरा छाया घर में है फातिमा ज़हरा के अंधेरा छाया आज की रात चरागों को आज की रात चरागों को बुझाओ लोगों आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठाओ लोगों आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठा खा के पत्थर भी जो उम्मत को दुआ देते रहे खा के पत्थर भी जो उम्मत को दुआ देते रहे ऐसे मोहसिन का ना एहसान ऐसे मोहसिन का ना एहसान भुलाओ लोगो आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठाओ लोगो आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठा क्यों हो खामोश बक़ैया के उजड़ जाने पर, क्यों हो खामोश बक़ैया के उजड़ जाने पर। अपने सरकार को ऐसे ना, अपने सरकार को ऐसे ना रुलाओ लोगों, आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठाओ लोगों, आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का। बाद बाबा के जिसे हक ना मिला दुनिया से, बाद बाबा के जिसे हक ना मिला दुनिया से, उसके हक के लिए आवाज़, उसके हक के लिए आवाज़ उठाओ लोगों, आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठाओ लोगों। या हुसैन, या हुसैन।
محمد وآل محمد صلوات اللهم صل. زيارة رسول الله. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا نبي الله، السلام عليك يا محمد بن عبد الله، السلام عليك يا خاتم النبيين. أشهد أنك قد بلغت الرسالة وأقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وعبدت الله مخلصا حتى أتاك اليقين. فصلوات الله عليك ورحمته وعلى أهل بيتك الطاهرين. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله، وأشهد أنك رسول الله، وأنك محمد بن عبد الله، وأشهد أنك قد بلغت رسالات ربك ونصحت لأمتك وجاهدت في سبيل الله وعبدت الله حتى أتاك اليقين بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة، وأديت الذي عليك من الحق، وأنك قد رأفت بالمؤمنين وغلظت على الكافرين، فبلغ الله بك أفضل شرف محل المكرمين. الحمد لله الذي استنقذنا بك من الشرك والضلالة. اللهم فاجعل صلواتك وصلوات ملائكتك المقربين وأنبيائك المرسلين وعبادك الصالحين وأهل السماوات والأرضين ومن سبح لك يا رب العالمين من الأولين والآخرين على محمد عبدك ورسولك ونبيك وأمينك ونجيك وحبيبك وصفيك وخاصتك وصفوتك وخيرتك من خلقك. اللهم أعطه الدرجة الرفيعة وآته الوسيلة من الجنة وابعثه مقاما محمودا يغبط به الأولون والآخرون. اللهم إنك قلت ولو أنهم ظلموا أنفسهم جاءوك فاستغفروا الله واستغفر لهم الرسول لوجدوا الله توابا رحيما. وإني أتيتك مستغفرا تائبا من ذنوبي وإني أتوجه به إلى الله ربي وربك ليغفر لي ذنوبي. أسأل الله الذي اجتباك واختارك وهداك وهدى بك أن يصلي عليك. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. السلام على علي أمير المؤمنين، السلام على فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، السلام على الحسن المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد الوصيين، السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. زيارة الإمام الرضا عليه السلام. السلام عليك يا مولاي وابن مولاي، السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء، السلام عليك يا سلطان أبا الحسن علي بن موسى الرضا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء. السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء. السلام عليك يا مغيث الشيعة والزوار في يوم الجزاء. السلام عليك يا أنيس النفوس. السلام عليك أيها المدفون بأرض طوس. السلام عليك يا علي بن موسى الرضا والتحية والثناء. السلام عليك وعلى آبائك السبعة وأبنائك الأربعة. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان سيدي الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان يا إمام الإنس والجان. عجل الله تعالاه فرجك وسهل الله تعالاه مخرجك وظهورك وجعلنا من أنصارك وأعوانك ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد